Okay, so in this video we're going to look at functional lobes of the brain and also at the cerebral circulation. So our brain is subdivided into major lobes according to the bones that they are in contact with. So here we have the frontal lobes, parietal, temporal, occipital lobes. And within the cerebral cortex, which is this, we have these convolutions that we call the gyri, and then we have indentations that are called the sulci. Because of this, we have a greater surface area where we can hold as many neurons as possible. So within the cortex, we have the gray matter where we have the neurons so we can think or produce certain functions. Okay, so within the brain we also have deeper sulcus that we have a specific name for them. So this will be the central sulcus that separates the frontal from the parietal, and then we have here the lateral that separates the temporal from the parietal and the frontal. Now within the cortex of the frontal lobe anterior to the central sulcus, we have the precentral gyrus, which is this. This is what we call the primary motor area. So movement for our muscles, it is given in the skeletal muscles because we have neurons that control such movement in here. So this is the primary motor area. So when you want to execute a movement, you stimulate your cerebral cortex in a particular area, and then you send a command through the upper motor neuron and then to the lower motor neuron, then you can execute that movement. So you start everything in here. And this area here, just anterior to the primary motor area, will be the premotor area. Now, posterior to the central sulcus, we have the postcentral gyrus, which is this. This is the primary somatosensory area. So anything in here that we can feel in our body, if we have no injuries, we can feel it in the different parts of this postcentral or primary somatosensory area. Things that we can feel, well, if an object is cold, hot, if something is painful, we can feel it because we have these neurons in here. And then the motor area and the primary somatosensory area are found on either the left or the right hemispheres. And the left hemisphere controls the movement of the right side of the body, and things that we feel on the right side of the body can be felt on the left side. So we have these axons of the neurons crossing somewhere along the line and then allowing for the control of movements contralaterally, or the feeling of sensations contralaterally. So we have here again primary motor area and primary somatosensory area. Now here within the occipital lobe we have the visual cortex, so we can make sense of what we see in this area. So if someone receives an injury in this area, the person won't be able to see. And then in here we have speech centers, like in here in this area, this is for controlling speech and music. And then in here we have the Wernicke's area, so this is for comprehension of the language. Now deeper here within this auditory and speech area, we have the primary auditory area. If I can detach hold on. So all of this here, this is primary auditory area. Now, I'm going to separate this into the different hemispheres so you can see more of this primary visual area. And then we have just superior to the corpus callosum, which is this is the corpus callosum, superior to the corpus callosum, we have a functional area of the brain that is called the limbic system. So the limbic system has this singular gyrus that ends here in the hippocampus. So this is the cerebellum. I'm going to remove the cerebellum. So this area in here, and I'm going to remove the brainstem as well. So this is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus, it is this area of the brain that allow us to store memory. So this is the hippocampus, and then here we have this singular gyrus that communicates with the hippocampus. Now, specifically in this part of the hippocampus, we have this olfactory area. That together with another area of olfaction that we have deep into the temporal and the parietal lobe, somewhere in here we have an area that's called the incus, help us to detect smell. Now this specific area next to the hippocampus, the olfactory area, it is important to store memories for olfaction, so you can remember any smells of your childhood or things like that, and you can associate it to emotions, because actually within this limbic system area, this is the area where we control our emotions, including fear, anger, and all of the emotions that we can have. So then this is the limbic system, and these are the functional areas of the brain. Now within this model as well, we're going to see the cerebral circulation. So within our brain, we have this polygon or circle of Willis in which we provide blood supply to the different regions of the brain. Now, two major blood vessels provide blood supply to the brain. If it's blood supply to the structure found within the middle cranial fossa, which is this, and the anterior cranial fossa, this blood supply will come from this major artery, which is the internal carotid. The internal carotid is a branch of the common carotid, which is this. So the internal carotid goes and enters through the carotid canal of the temporal bone and gives this middle cerebral artery. So the branch of the internal carotid that provides blood supply to the mid portion of the brain will be the middle cerebral artery. And then the cerebral circulation that gives blood supply to the posterior structures in the posterior cranial fossa will be coming from the vertebral arteries, which are this. The vertebral arteries, they run here in the transverse foramen of the transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae. So these will be the vertebral arteries, which merge and they form this basilar artery. And then the basilar artery is going to form these posterior cerebral arteries, and then you will have blood supply to the posterior portion of the brain. So now the middle cerebral artery is going to communicate with this posterior cerebral artery through these communicating arteries that we call the posterior communicating arteries. And then this middle cerebral artery is going to communicate with this tiny branch, which is called the anterior cerebral artery, through these anterior cerebral communicating arteries. So all of this blood supply is going to go around this pituitary gland that we have in the sella turcica. So this is the sella turcica, so we have the pituitary gland, and then this circle of arteries or polygon of Willis can provide redundancy of blood supply just in case that any of these branches get occluded. So what are the branches then of the polygon of Willis? The posterior cerebral artery, posterior communicating arteries, the middle cerebral artery, anterior communicating arteries, and then the anterior cerebral arteries. So when you provide blood supply to the brain tissues, you have to return this blood supply into veins. Now, in the case of the brain, we, instead of calling these blood vessels that returns the blood into the circulation, instead of calling them veins, we call them sinuses. And then we have a major sinus, so this is the upper part of the skull. So we have this major sinus that is called superior sagittal sinus because it runs in the cerebral hemisphere, in the longitudinal fissure of the brain, or mid-sagittal fissure, and this is called sagittal sinus. So we have the superior sagittal sinus that receives the blood supply, part of it from the superior portion of the brain, and then we have an inferior sagittal sinus that runs here, and then they drain into this straight sinus, and then they drain as well into this sagittal sinus, or sorry, this into this sagittal sinus, and then they drain into the jugular vein that goes through this foramen that is called the jugular foramen. Now there is this vein that runs from the orbit or from the face into the brain, and when it drains into the brain, it drains into this cavernous sinus. So this cavernous sinus, that it is around this area next to the polygon of Willis, if someone has an infection from the face or from the upper teeth, this infection can be transferred from the face into the cavernous sinus, and the person will have meningitis, and the person more than likely will have a complication and it can die. So this is a serious infection if someone has an infection in the cavernous sinus. So this is all for the functional lobes of the brain and the cerebral circulation, and I will see you in the next video.